If you are a teacher, parent, administrator, student, and/or anyone who loves reconnecting children with nature, and you want to figure out how to cultivate learning gardens and nature-based curriculum, then this is the podcast, the Outdoor Classrooms podcast. My name is Victoria Hackett. I am the founder of Outdoor-Classrooms.com and the Secret Gardens Nature Classes. I love witnessing the magic that happens when children are playfully learning outdoors. Observing the return of wonder and curiosity when children are interacting with nature is pure magic. This is the podcast that is going to help you capture children's interest and give you not only inspiration, but some real life strategies that are going to help you figure out how to use the outdoor space, your outdoor space, as a teaching tool, so you can enlighten the playful learning experience for young children. Welcome to our Outdoor Classrooms community. Today we have a very, very special episode with Sandra Duncan and Clare Nugent. Sandra is an international specialist on early childhood environments. She has conducted extensive research on psychology of places and spaces, specifically how children engage with built environments and natural surroundings. Sandra applies the pedagogical theories of Reggio Emilia, Montessori, and Waldorf when creating holistic design places for young children. Dr. Duncan is a former owner of a multi-site, multi-state early learning campuses, president of an educational publishing company, and publisher of 2 well-respected educational journals. She is also the author of 7 books focused on environmental design, designer of 4 furniture collections, and adjunct faculty at Nova Southeastern University. Sandra has designed and teaches university courses on built early learning environments, collaborating with architects, interior designers, and educators to create extraordinary places and possibilities for children and students of all ages. She is eternally grateful for the many opportunities she has experienced, transforming hundreds of environments into extraordinary and inspiring places for young children. Clare Nugent questions, how can something as small as a bird change the course of one's life? It is a little black-capped chickadee that filled Clare with hope and gave her life direction during a particular painful time many years ago. A tiny bird sparked a dream that could change the course of her life forever. Clare clearly sees that it's been the painful trials that have truly shaped her life and made her a more impactful and empathetic educator. She is a children's naturalist who uses imagination and make-believe to deepen children's experience with and in the outdoors. Clare owns and operates Ferntop Nature School, an outdoor school in the Middle Tennessee for children ages 3 to 14 years. The school is located on her farm and has been running since 2014. Without further ado, Sandra Duncan and Clare Nugent. Hello, everybody. We are here with Sandra Duncan and Clare Nugent, and they are going to be doing a presentation called More Than a Tomato Plant, Engaging the Players. If you are listening to the podcast, you will not be able to see the beautiful presentation that you have. The beautiful presentation will be going into our Circle membership community, so all of our members can find this presentation inside our Outdoor Classrooms tour and talks. So without further ado, Sandra Duncan and Clare Nugent.
Well, hello there. I am so excited to be with you today along with Clare Nugent. I'm Sandra Duncan, and as was said, we are doing a presentation, More Than a Tomato Plant, Engaging the Players. This presentation is actually based on an article Clare and I wrote, and we're going to make that available to you after the presentation. So again, welcome, and we're going to begin right away with a story from Clare.
Yes. Hi, my name is Clare Nugent, and I've had the pleasure of being on Victoria's podcasts before. And since then, I've gotten married. So that's my big news. In love at 50. I do want to tell you a little story to begin this session. It's the story of my garden failure. I own and operate a nature school in Middle Tennessee, and it's on our farm. And when I first began the school, I, of course, wanted a garden. And so I actually bought an aquatic plant store that had gone belly up during 2008. And I was left with these amazing garden beds, a lot more than I needed. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start this garden. I know how beneficial it is for children. So I planted a pizza garden and I planted an indigenous, like a Native American garden with corn. And I planted all these different themed gardens. And I had this vision of how the children would behave when they stepped through the garden gate. And I quickly realized that they didn't do anything that I wanted them to do in the garden. They would start running. They would dig where they weren't supposed to dig. In 5 minutes, they plucked all of the tomatoes out of the pizza garden. They were all green, by the way. And they left destruction all over that garden. And so I remember that night sitting, tired, sweaty, feeling like such a failure because what I envisioned for that garden was nothing like what happened. So as time went on and I started to really watch and observe how the children engaged with that space, I realized that the garden actually awakens children to play. It doesn't, like, children do not change the way they play just because they've walked in through the garden gate. If anything, it ignites their play and causes them to be more excited about their play. And I also realized that the children who played make-believe and family and had a real storytelling narrative in the classroom, that didn't stop because they were in the garden. They wanted to continue it with the props and the plants and the space that was in the garden. The children who were builders in the classroom, with marble runs and blocks and all their elaborate building, when they came to the garden, they quickly wanted to construct ramps and ways to move dirt from one bed to the other. And they were constantly looking and asking for tools and boards and these things that I thought, well, that's not supposed to be in the garden. We're not supposed to have blocks in the garden. You need to harvest, plant and harvest, plant and harvest. That's what you need to do in a garden. And I also realized that the investigator, like the child who was searching for bugs and roly-polies and salamanders and butterflies on the playground, when they stepped through the garden gate, oh my goodness, all of a sudden they walked into a jungle because I had zinnias planted everywhere and there were butterflies going from one flower to the other. So all that I'm saying here is that I started to identify that there are certain types of players in the garden, just like there are players in the classroom and the playground. And instead of me forcing them into a box, I needed to allow time and space and tools for those players in the garden. So that's my story about the garden.
Incredible.
So I quickly learned that play isn't dependent on place, that children's play is everywhere. And just because as adults, we have a way we think a space should work, children do not read that memo at all. And so their play, again, think about the colors in a garden. Think about the textures in a garden. Think about the magical spaces like the high sunflowers and the bean teepees. Children, it's a magical place for make-believe and play. And that isn't left on the playground and in the classroom. All of a sudden, play is ignited when you walk into the garden.
So that's a very interesting lesson that Claire learned. And when we're thinking about our own classrooms, most of us have meticulously set up our classrooms. We want them to have a certain number of centers or areas in our classrooms, right? And we do this sometimes because we choose to do it, or we may do it because we're required to have a certain number of centers in the classroom by a governing or regulatory agency. But we work really, really hard in our classrooms to have just the right number of classroom centers and just the right number and type of materials in the classroom. We work hard at designing our classrooms to have these play areas in the space. There are many, many play areas in this traditional classroom environment. For example, we typically have an art center or block centers or science center or home living or construction, cozy corners, manipulatives, gathering area, writing. We have all of these play areas that we meticulously design into the space that we have. But in the outdoor environment, there are not as many intentional play spaces. As we design our environments, we consider the children that reside in the classroom each and every day. And although we do this for our indoor environment, we rarely carry out this intentionality in the outdoor play space. So let's think about that outdoor environment. But before we do, let's consider who's playing in that outdoor garden environment.
So, over the years, as I've watched children engage in the space, and I do want to say, Ferntop has a really large garden, but I love this little picture that Sandra has. And for those of you who are listening, there are little tomato cans and Ritz cracker cans and things and yogurt containers that are filled with flowers just hanging on a garden fence. The space is so magical to children. I told Sandra as we were preparing for this podcast, I can remember when I was a little girl playing in my grandmother's garden, and it's one of my first memories of nature. And I just thought it was the largest thing, and it was so magical, and there were all these little meandering paths, and I spent hours there, and I went back as an adult and saw how large it was, and it was 2 5x7 raised garden beds. And I was floored because I thought, oh my goodness, it was the world to me. It was large. It was like stepping into a large space, but really it was tiny. So I do want to encourage those of you who have small spaces. This can go for those of you who do have small spaces when I'm thinking about the players in the garden. But as I observed the students playing and engaging with the space, I identified a handful of I call them garden players. The first is the collector. And we all know those kind of children. Their pockets, when you wash their clothes at night, they're full of all sorts of stuff, right? But the collector is a player who has an urge to pick and collect just for the pure joy of it. Sometimes there's a purpose in mind for a certain play project. These children are cutting mint, and these children are shelling beans and putting them into baskets. But you may hear comments from the collectors such as, "This is for my mommy," as they grab a handful of flowers, or "I need this for a cake I'm making." But children need vessels. They need containers. So when you're thinking about designing your garden for a player, think about the collector. Think about buckets. Think about old yogurt containers. Think about all sorts of baskets. I go to Goodwill and buy baskets. Another real big fail that I did in my garden, like I said in the beginning, is I had a pizza garden, which meant I had about 3 tomato plants, some basil that I bought at the store, some oregano, which does grow really great, by the way, in Tennessee. But the longer I've worked with children, the more I realize, they want to cut and collect a lot of plants. So, Sandra, can you go back to the other slide of the little girls cutting the peppermint plant? So, yeah, so one one suggestion that I have, if you just have one space for growing, I would grow peppermint or holy basil or lemon balm, one of these herbs that they love haircuts. I call them haircut plants because the more you cut them, the happier they are, and they will grow fast. And it's almost like you can't kill these plants. So, I decided to I call them tea beds because we make tea out of the plants as we dry them. They love to be cut. So that's the first player that I've identified in the garden as collector. The second player that I've identified that comes to the garden is the digger. And I will say that a lot of what I see is the boys. They want to dig. They want to dig a hole to China. They want to dig a hole to their house. And they want the heft of the shovel. They want to feel the force of the shovel cutting into the ground. They have that sensory need. And so I dedicated a bed just for diggers. I think on the next slide that we have, so this is my little nephew, Josiah, who's using a hoe and digging up a spot. Oh, I guess we didn't have another slide for the digger, but I have dedicated a bed just for digging, and I have a sign that says, please dig. And then I give them real tools, real hefty shovels. They're short shovels. They're shortest shovels, but they're real shovels that they can really get earth turned over with. But having a dedicated area is a great idea because children will come into the garden and they will, in 5 minutes, destroy something that you've worked hard with. But you can say, hey, I see you have a need to dig. Here's the digging bed right here. Dig to your heart's content. The third player that we have coming through the garden gate is the transformer. And this is the artist. This is the person who likes to get messy. As we know, children have a constant need to transform materials. And so the garden is a place where, again, if you have plants that like to be trimmed, which is what I recommend, by the way, if you work with children, then you can let them pick these flowers. We've got goldenrod and some crepe myrtle here on a cloth. And then I've got some rubber mallets that I'm going to fold the cloth over and the children are going to pound and do flower pounding. I've got the rubber mallets in this little garden shed that I have in the garden so the children have access to it. I'll also say another great tool for the child who loves to transform materials is a source of water. So I have a couple of really big rain barrels in the garden that children can manipulate, turn on and off without having to mess with the hose. We have palettes in the garden, art palettes. These are called Buddha boards, and what we're looking at, listener, is I think they're like 8.5 by 11. They stand up like easels, and all it takes is a water to transform what's on this board. And and we also have paint and easels in the garden. So the transformer, once they go through the garden gate, it's not that they want to start transforming. If anything, they want to transform more things. The fourth garden player is the storyteller. This is the child who lives in the land of make-believe. This is a child who is constantly telling a story and acting something out and has a real imaginative play plan. And so this little girl, the picture that we're looking at she has a cupcake tin and she has got materials in the individual containers, and she's talking to Sunny, who is trimming some parsley, and they have this elaborate family cooking story going because we have like a mud pie kitchen in the garden as well. So great tools for a storyteller are shelter structures, the big bean teepees, the large sunflowers, even just bringing fabric to drape over 2 chairs. But I would say the biggest gift that we can give these storytellers is time. Give them time. Not all children want to, again, plant and harvest. Give them time to play in the garden. So the next player we have is the investigator. The investigator is that garden player who likes to seek, hunt, explore for answers. He enjoys facts and learning new information. The investigator likes to ask questions. They look closely. So zinnias are my favorite plant for the garden investigator because on a zinnia, you will have praying mantises. You'll have lots of butterflies. You'll have ladybugs, aphids. You'll have all sorts of little critters and mini beasts for them to investigate. And it's also the height of the zinnia is exciting for a child. And I often put little paths in my zinnia bed so that they can nestle in there and really look. Some great tools for the investigator, small clipboards, paper and pencils, field guides. We have a lot of those plastic foldable field guides. And then, of course, bug jars and magnifying glasses are great for this garden player. So I will say I've got some honorable mentions that didn't make it into the article. I think the next slide, do we have another slide for our honorable mentions, Sandra?
I think we forgot it. I'm sorry.
Okay, so let me just quickly say that, and you're going to talk about space, but honorable mention would be the nibbler. These are children who have a need for oral sensory input. So make sure that whatever you have in your garden is edible. So having a lot of garden herbs, peppermint, lemon balm, holy basil, like I said. And I will say, holy basil is my favorite herb to plant. And it's different than your basil that you're going to find at the garden store. It grows so much better than just the variety that they sell at the garden store. Often you have to buy the seeds, though, online. The next garden player that I need to mention is the planter, the children who do like to plant. So we have a lot of play seeds. These are seeds that I've just collected over the years. And I have a garden bed that they can just plant the seeds. And what comes up, and I don't care. So it's just that act of putting it into the earth and watering it, covering it up and watering it. The artist, the children who are compelled to create with any and all materials that surround them. The artist and transformer kind of go hand in hand. The builder, the thinker, children who just want to be by themselves and just have a quiet space to just kind of think and reflect or look at a book. The helpers, these are the children who want a job. So, go water that plant. Go bring the builders this bucket of dirt. And then the last helper that I've identified is the waterer, the children who want to deal with water the whole time. So those are the players that I have identified in the garden.
Claire, those are amazing. We have a program here, the Secret Gardens Outdoor Classroom, and I can think of a child for every one of those players. And I love how you incorporated ideas and elements that you can put into your outdoor classroom and your teaching gardens that help those players. So it's instead of creating the space and then having the children enjoy it, think of the children first and then create. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I think when I first heard Claire present this idea, it was like a light bulb went on. It was like, oh my gosh, because when you think about gardens and when you think about children in gardens, it's mostly what you think about is plant the seed, water it, let it grow, and harvest it. Plant and harvest, plant and harvest. And it's more than that tomato plant that you plant and then you harvest it and you make salsa or pizzas from it. It's more than that. And I thank Claire so much for turning on that light bulb for me. It's a totally different perspective of children and gardening. So you think about the child first, and then you think about what you could do in the garden to help children activate those interests and activate those experiences and things that they are, and not necessarily thinking about the garden as a place for just planting and harvesting. So thank you, Claire, for opening my eyes.
I do teacher trainings here at Ferntop quite often, and a lot of the teachers and educators that I have come through this space, they are excited because finally their administration has said, oh, wow, okay, you've been bugging us about this nature play stuff. We'll give you a garden space. You can have a school garden. And it's exciting because finally they have a little bit of a plot of land to work with. So I often tell educators, if a school garden is your entry point to more time for these children to be outside, take it. Like, it's a wonderful thing, but understand this concept that it's another classroom, like it's another space for them to play. And so, like Sandra said, it's not just a place to plant and harvest. It is a space for them to be surrounded by dynamic changes all the time. And children, I think Sandra has in her presentation about the calming effect that the outdoors has on our children. And so what I want to say to you is if your administration, if your director, if your boss has said, okay, you can have a school garden, wonderful. Think about that school garden as another playground. Seriously.
Terrific.
So one of the things that we wanted to mention today is some of you might be thinking, oh, this sounds great, Claire and Sandra. This sounds wonderful if you have a large space to work with. And I know some of us are in urban areas and some of us are in city areas. Some of us don't necessarily have a garden plot to work with. And so if you could see my screen, you could see some ideas, and I'll try to talk through them. So if you don't have space, if you don't have that big plot of land, let's see if we can think outside the garden plot. And Claire mentioned earlier, one idea is, could you make your garden and could you plant your garden into the cans that the food comes into your kitchens? Only thing you have to be careful of the sharp edges, of course, but could you use that large tomato can that's filled with tomato pieces for your spaghetti? Could you empty out the spaghetti tomatoes and could you clean it out and could you make that a space for a small garden? Or could you clean out that big yogurt plastic container and could you make that a small pot for a geranium? What could you use that you already have that's coming into your school already? What could you use as containers? And I think using containers from the kitchen might be a good start for you.
Yeah. And I will say also, Sandra, also what's around on the ground. I know in Tennessee right now we have onion grass growing everywhere, and of course dandelion and chickweed and henbit and all those great wildflowers or weeds. I think they're flowers, but and we've been letting the children scissor practice with the onion grass. And
Oh, great
so,
idea.
that's another idea. If you don't have a garden, there's onion grass. So
Perfect. It's a great idea. I've never stopped to even think about, just giving children scissors and going out and maybe not even if it's not onion grass, what if it's just grass? That would be fun.
the grass
Another
does
idea.
grow up out like a head of hair. And so I say, go give that person a haircut. Ooh.
Another idea might be, if you could see the image, is an old suitcase and open up the suitcase, the old fashioned type of suitcase, fill it up with dirt and make that your garden. It could be just a freestanding suitcase garden.
Mm-hmm.
The dirt can't be very deep unless you have a big suitcase. But in this image, it's a rather thin suitcase. What about, and I love this idea. I was at a center one day and I snapped this picture, and it's a picture of a plastic dump truck. And inside the dump truck are petunias growing inside the bed of the dump truck. And I asked the teacher about it or the director about it, and she goes, "Oh, well, I was about ready to throw it out because the dump truck was missing a wheel. But I decided, you know what? I'm not going to throw it out. I'm going to make it into a very tiny garden." And so just use your creativity and think outside the garden plot about what you could do if you don't have that large space of land. And finally, one of my favorite types of gardens are gardens that you could have in a wagon. And in this image, if you could see it, it's little pots of plants that are placed inside the wagon, but you could make the wagon itself the garden and just fill it up with dirt. But what I like about this idea is I live in Michigan, and it gets really cold in Michigan in the wintertime. And so you have this wonderful fern growing or whatever you might have growing in the summertime in Michigan. All you have to do is just pull it inside and it becomes an indoor garden. So I like that idea. So there's a few ideas that you might take up if you feel you don't have that large garden plot or that big space. The question really becomes, why? Why do we want to offer these opportunities for garden players? Well, there's many well-researched reasons for thinking about these garden players. One reason Claire mentioned earlier, and that's the imprint of nature on children. And it's not only the children, but it's also the adult and the teacher players in the outdoor space, is that nature has the instinctive ability to calm people. As a matter of fact, there's some research by a gentleman named Kaplan, and he has this theory. It's called the ART, and it has nothing to do with paintbrushes and paints. It's ART, and it's the attention restorative theory. And what this theory is that when you are out in nature, you start to think with your heart rather than thinking with your head. And so this attention restorative theory idea is that children and adults become more calm when they're out in nature because they stop thinking with their head and they start thinking with their heart. Another reason why we should do this is we know from the research that with nature's curves, it's the curvilinear theory. And research tells us that our brains are more comfortable with curves rather than with angles. And if you start to think about your own classroom, your inside classroom, think about all the angles that are in your inside classroom. Traditionally, it's the table, it's the window, it's the cubbies, it's the shelving units. It's lots and lots of angles in our classroom. So if the research is right that our brains are more comfortable with curves, then in the inside classroom, we should be putting more curves in, like a round mirror or a round rug or a round ottoman, anything that's round or curvilinear. But a simple solution to this is to get out in nature, because if you start to think about nature and how it looks and how it feels, nature has a ton of curves inherent in every single piece of element that is outside. The biolific theory, of course, is the idea that we feel more calmness. We feel more attuned when we're out in nature. So the last reason why we need to provide opportunities for garden players is nature is free and it's pretty much easily accessible. So there are many, many reasons why we need to consider opportunities for the garden player. But I would like you to consider one additional reason. If you can think back for just a moment about your childhood, journey back in time and back to the days of your childhood. Can you think about a memory that involves light? Just consider that for just a moment. Can you think about a childhood memory that involves light, the play of light, or something that involved light itself? So as you think about that, as you thought about that idea, you might have thought about a campfire and maybe roasting marshmallows and making s'mores. A flickering flame draws us in all the time. You know, even in our modern society, an evening by a roaring fire is noteworthy. Our campfires engage multiple senses, and that warm glow of that fire, that crackling sound of the wood, the smell of the burning logs, and the visual beauty of those flickering flames. You might have thought about that type of light, or you thought about sparklers or fireworks on the 4th of July. You might have thought about that kind of light memory. Or maybe you might have thought about the lightning bug. That's one of my favorite memories as childhood and also as a grandma. I love to try to catch lightning bugs with my grandchild when she was really, really young. She was really good at catching the lightning bugs, and we'd put them in a jar for just a few moments and then we'd let them go. But that experience of that lightning bug and that light and catching the light of the fireflies in the mason jar. That's what I think about when I think about when I was younger. Or maybe your light memory included fairy lights, like the fairy lights, the string of fairy lights, or maybe holiday lights on a tree. While many of us thought about some of these things, the campfire, the fairy lights, the lightning bugs, we might have thought about these lights. And why did we think about those sparkly lights? And maybe, just maybe, there's a deeper part, an older part of our brain that's being triggered by these tiny lights. Maybe there's this prehistoric button that's being pressed because in prehistoric times, we didn't flip on a light switch to get our light. We had to find our way through starlight. We had to find our way through looking at the stars. We also might have thought about finding our way with sparkly water, because we had to look for fresh water, and sparkly water is fresh water. There's even a theory that why we look for and are comfortable with sparkly lights and fire is because of this prehistoric button that's being pushed. But it also might be something about our innate sensory competencies. Babies are born gathering sensory comfort, and they're born loving the way that the water feels and the water smells and that visual appeal. That's an innate sensory competency that babies are born with. So maybe that's why we look toward these sparkly lights. Or maybe one of the things that we look towards are the sparkly lights of the stars or the sparkly water is maybe it's an innate sensory need, like listening and hearing the ocean's rhythm, the water splashing on the beach. Maybe it's this innate sensory need. And so if you could see my screen, you would see that there is a seashell, and the seashell is on the beach, and there is water rushing on and over the seashell. I started to think about maybe our love of beautiful, sparkly water and our love of starry nights might be much more than that prehistoric button or the innate sensory needs. It might be much, much more. Maybe it's a connection to childhood. When I was growing up, I lived near Lake Michigan. And it was very common for my mom and dad to take me to Lake Michigan. And while I didn't search for seashells on Lake Michigan, I loved to walk the beach and search for rocks that were brought up by the splashing of the water. And so maybe I love to go to the beach, and I love to search for seashells. Last week, I was in Fort Myers, and I searched the beach for shells. I came home with almost 5 pounds of seashells. And I started thinking about it when I was doing this presentation is it my love for the seashells? And I'm thinking maybe it isn't my love for the seashells. Maybe it's my connection to the beach and the sand and the water. Maybe it's that magical connection and my emotional connection. Research has told us that we remember our childhood stories because of our emotional connection and that emotional significance. So maybe when you thought about your childhood memory of light, maybe you thought about it because of that emotional connection. The campfires, the twinkly lights, all of that being together with your family and the relaxation and the joy. Maybe you thought about it not because of that prehistoric button, not because of those innate competencies you were trying to fulfill, but you thought about it because of a significant emotional moment. Our brains tend to remember these events that are significantly emotionally connected. And these moments create lasting memories. And you might be thinking, okay, I don't get it, Sandra. I thought we were talking about gardens. I didn't think we were talking about sparkly lights and twinkly lights and stars in the sky and the sparkly waters. I thought we were talking about gardens. What the connection is the connection is, are we growing children's memories and their emotional connection to your garden? Are we growing children's memories? Are we doing something more than growing a tomato plant? I believe that we are. I believe that by providing gardens and addressing those players that we have in the garden, that we are indeed growing childhood memories. I think gardens are much more than tomato plants. Young children are losing their childhood in today's world. Children's childhood are being threatened by the plastic that we have, the gadgets with our buttons, the television, the computer screens. Our classrooms are being governed by numbers nowadays. We have to have the correct number of blocks, the right number and type of blocks, the required number of centers, the necessary manipulatives. Our classrooms inside are being governed by stuff. This stuff is supposedly equated to quality. Likewise, children's outdoor habitats are being governed and covered sometimes with cement. There's less outdoor play, less space to play, less risky play, and most importantly, less time to play outside. A recent study found that prisoners at a maximum security facility in the U.S. are guaranteed 2 hours of outdoor time daily, whereas the average child, one of 2 children worldwide, spend less than an hour outdoors. All of this, the inside and the outside, I believe is causing an erosion of childhood. It is time really to stop this erosion of childhood. It's time to create new habitats for young children where they have certain inalienable rights. The right and the freedom to move, to play, and to belong. Where habitats are places and not merely spaces, where children can do what they do best. Be children. I believe preserving childhood begins with the garden. It begins with the tomato plant. Thank you.
Oh, I just got goosebumps. Thank you so much. So beautiful. Any final words that you want to close on? Just incredible, learning so much here.
I really appreciate the way that Sandra connects a lot of the ways that she speaks and talks with her childhood memories. I think that it's been such a blessing to have an older woman in my life that she kind of sees the bigger
Almost
picture.
80.
Yeah.
Almost 80.
Yeah, you're the Energizer Bunny. I just told my husband, I'm like, she could run circles around me. But I just appreciate the wider scope that she has and the way that she is able to make connections. A lot of times my head is I have tunnel vision, and she encourages me to take a step back and say, okay, wait, this is the bigger reason why we're doing this. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, really looking at that scope. And it just a beautiful, beautiful, both of you, beautiful, beautiful presentation. So again, those that are listening, I hope you enjoyed this incredible conversation. And again, the Circle members can find this incredible presentation with the beautiful, beautiful pictures and videos in our Circle membership community under the Outdoor Classrooms Tour and Talk. So again, thank you, Sandra Duncan, and thank you, Clare Nugent. And we will get all your information in our show notes and all that contact information. Thank you again.
Welcome.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Victoria.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. Before we sign off, we have an exciting opportunity for educators looking to bring learning to life outdoors. Consider enhancing your teaching journey with the Outdoor Classrooms Teacher Certification Program. This program empowers educators to transform any outdoor space into a dynamic learning environment. By joining, you'll gain skills to inspire students and foster a deeper connection with the natural world. Interested in making a difference with outdoor learning? Visit www.outdoor-classrooms.com to learn more about enrolling in the certification program. Don't miss the chance to expand your teaching toolkit and inspire the next generation with the joy of outdoor education. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring content. Until next time, keep inspiring young minds.